welcome to the deep dive. Okay, so when you think about the heart of global finance, you probably imagine that huge vault, right? The New York Fed, deep under Manhattan, packed with gold. Yeah, supposed to be the safest place on earth for actual physical wealth. Well, today we're looking into something that really shakes that image. We've got sources detailing what sounds like a financial earthquake. We're talking about nearly 1,500 tons of gold. That's what, $250 billion?
Huge amount.
Huge. And it's apparently been pulled out of those vaults secretly, mostly by China, but then Europe started making moves too. And this isn't just, numbers on a spreadsheet. Our sources are saying this is a really deliberate move, like trying to step away from the U.S. financial system could actually redraw the whole global economic map. Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today is to dig into the sources we have on these strategic, kind of secretive gold moves. We need to get at those core questions. Why the shift? Why does the world suddenly see the U.S. maybe not as the ultimate guarantor, but as a potential political risk? And crucially, what does this gold exit mean for the U.S. dollar? For the wider economy? What happens when the big players decide they don't trust the vault keeper anymore?
Well, what's really fascinating, I think, is how this movement of physical gold points to a breakdown in trust. It's been building for a while, decades perhaps, but it's only now becoming really actionable. It's a powerful nonverbal signal, isn't it? Major powers prioritizing their own financial sovereignty over, the convenience of U.S. storage. I mean, when a country like China uses its own military planes to ship gold, that's not just logistics. That's signaling a major strategic shift towards independence.
Right, let's start right there. With that specific, a quite shocking move by China, our sources describe it almost poetically as the return of the dragon to its throne. And this wasn't a trickle. We're talking, as you said, about 1,500 tons, give or take, value. Around $250 billion moved in just 5 weeks. 5 weeks. And the way they did it, it almost sounds like something out of a movie.
It really does. And the method, that's what screams intent. They didn't use standard commercial transport, not at all. China reportedly used a whole fleet of their Y-20 military aircraft, using military planes for this kind of thing. It tells you volumes. They treated it like a critical strategic operation, not a simple bank transfer.
And the secrecy. To avoid any alarm bells during that period of rising U.S.-China trade friction, the shipments were apparently labeled as ultra-precise industrial equipment.
Right, industrial equipment.
That level of deception, plus the sheer size, makes it the largest gold repatriation, certainly in modern history.
And while getting concrete, independent proof of every detail in an operation like this is obviously tough.
Sure.
The reported scale alone was enough to send ripples. For, 70 years? Gold and the NY Fed was the ultimate symbol of safety, global financial bedrock. Then suddenly, China basically demonstrates that this guarantee might be conditional, that maybe holding your national treasure in the U.S. wasn't just safe storage anymore, it was actually a political risk.
A huge precedent. If China can just take its gold back using military planes in secret, well, other countries must be thinking, maybe we should too.
Exactly. It plants that seed of doubt.
So to really grasp the significance of that, we probably need a bit of history. Why did the U.S. become the world's gold vault in the first place? Take us back maybe to, 1944?
Yeah, absolutely. The story really starts with the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944. After World War II, the world desperately needed financial stability. So the agreement basically linked the U.S. dollar directly to gold, fixed at $35 an ounce, and then all other major currencies were pegged to the dollar. That system effectively made the U.S. dollar the world's undisputed reserve currency.
Okay, but for that promise, dollars backed by gold to be believable, you needed somewhere secure, totally unbreachable to keep all that gold.
Precisely. And post-war, the U.S. was really the only viable option. It was victorious, incredibly wealthy, far from the conflicts that had torn Europe apart. You had political stability, economic muscle, military security. So it made sense for the world to centralize its physical gold reserves there, mostly in New York.
And the amount stored there is just staggering, even today. The New York Fed holds the largest single stockpile, over 6,300 tons. And that belongs to more than 90 different countries and international organizations. We're not even counting America's own gold here.
No, this is foreign-owned gold, valued today at over $460 billion.
But here's where it gets interesting. The geopolitical layer. It wasn't just about having a technically secure vault. The U.S. positioned itself as the global security guarantor. So while legally the gold belonged to depositors, Germany, Italy, France, Japan, China, the U.S. effectively controlled access. They controlled the timing of withdrawal, the verification process. Our sources really emphasize this. The vaults became this sort of hidden but very powerful tool of influence. America could subtly remind everyone who held the keys to their ultimate financial backup plan.
Okay, so that established trust, that historical arrangement, it seems to have fractured quite badly. And the main reason for this current wave of withdrawals, according to our sources, isn't some immediate economic meltdown fear. It's more political anxiety, strategic caution about the intentions of the U.S. itself. This didn't just pop up out of nowhere, did it? There were specific triggers. Our sources point directly at political rhetoric, specifically from Trump, aimed even at the U.S. Federal Reserve. Warnings about maybe imposing tariffs or even talk of potentially freezing assets if the Fed didn't toe the line on policy. That kind of talk chips away at the idea that U.S. financial institutions are truly independent, doesn't it?
It absolutely does, and internationally that's noticed. Plus, everyone saw a very real, very recent example of financial power being used as a weapon.
Yeah.
Europe watched closely how the U.S. and allies reacted to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Financial sanctions weren't just hitting banks. They involved freezing hundreds of billions in Russian state assets held abroad. So that raises a really uncomfortable question for allies, even close allies like Germany or Italy. If the U.S. can use financial access as leverage against an adversary, what's to stop Washington, theoretically, from using gold storage as leverage against an ally who disagrees on something important? Maybe defense spending or trade policy or some diplomatic spat.
Okay, let's clarify that point because it's crucial. The gold is physical bars, right? It's not digital dollars that can just be blocked. How could the U.S. actually weaponize gold that belongs to, say, Germany?
It boils down to custodial control and potentially overriding agreements. The U.S. wouldn't necessarily try to, seize the gold outright. That would be extreme. But they could obstruct access. Imagine a scenario. The U.S. government, perhaps citing some national emergency or specific sanction policy, issues an order to the Federal Reserve, an order prohibiting the release, the physical repatriation of gold back to a specific country. Suddenly, that nation's gold, their sovereign asset, is effectively trapped. It becomes a bargaining chip, a kind of financial hostage.
Okay. That makes sense. It's the access they control.
Exactly. And that fear, that possibility, has fundamentally changed how countries view their gold. It's gone from being just this inert crisis hedge to potentially becoming an active instrument of political leverage and negotiation.
And that fear seems to be driving the next wave of moves by major European allies. This calculated push to regain actual physical control, to enhance their financial sovereignty. We're talking serious amounts here, too. Germany has about 3,352 tons globally, Italy around 2,452 tons. Combined, their holdings in New York alone are worth over $245 billion. That represents roughly a third of their total reserves just sitting under Manhattan.
So if China's move was this big geopolitical statement, Europe's potential withdrawal feels more like strategic risk management, hedging their bets.
And it's not just central bankers quietly making these decisions, is it? There's political pressure.
Definitely. There's been significant popular and political demand in these countries to get the gold back home where they can actually see it, audit it, control it directly. In Germany, you had politicians like Peter Gauweiler and Fabio De Masi being quite outspoken. They explicitly warned about the risk of a U.S. president potentially interfering via the Fed. Their argument was simple. Our national wealth shouldn't be subject to the political whims of another country, even an ally.
Similar story in Italy, right? Calls coming from parties like the one led by Giorgia Meloni, basically saying, let's bring our gold home to shield it from external political risks.
Yeah. And if you step back and look at the bigger picture, it's this incredible historical flip. Think about it. During the Cold War, the big fear was a Soviet invasion of Western Europe. So New York seemed like the only truly safe place for European gold, far from the potential front lines now. That fear of instability or intervention from Moscow has almost completely been replaced by suspicion and concern about policies coming out of Washington.
Wow. So the threat perception has totally reversed?
It seems so. The priority has shifted dramatically towards ensuring financial sovereignty above all else.
Okay, so we have the motive, political anxiety, sovereignty. We have the action China's move, Europe considering it. Now, the consequences. What happens if Germany and Italy really do decide to pull out significant amounts of their gold? What's the ripple effect, or maybe the tsunami effect, on the U.S. dollar and the U.S. economy? Our sources mention a Financial Times report that sounds pretty alarming. It apparently sets a specific threshold.
Yes, that threshold figure is important for you to keep in mind. The analysis suggests that if Germany and Italy, just those two, were to withdraw 1,930 tons combined, which remember is less than half of what they hold there, the impact starts getting severe. systemic even.
How so? What actually happens?
Well, first, the Fed would physically have to start dismantling huge gold deposits. Moving massive amounts of physical gold isn't easy or available. The market would see this happening. That visible exodus would immediately undermine global confidence in the dollar's fundamental stability. The perception that it's solidly backed would take a hit.
And there's a mechanism for how this translates into economic pain, right? It involves U.S. bonds.
Exactly. The likely way these countries would fund the complex, expensive process of moving physical gold is by selling off their holdings of U.S. Treasury bonds. So they're doing two things at once. They're pulling out the physical asset that notionally backs the dollar, and they're flooding the market with U.S. debt.
Double whammy, which puts immediate intense pressure on U.S. bond markets. Bond prices fall.
And yields, the interest rates the U.S. government have to pay in its debt, go up. That cost of borrowing for the U.S. government rises.
And that doesn't just stay in Washington, does it? That impacts regular people.
Directly. Higher government borrowing costs eventually translate into higher interest rates across the economy.
Right.
Our sources project that even a relatively small hike, say 15 basis points, that's 0.15% on things like mortgages, could add hundreds of dollars a year to the average homeowner's payments.
Ouch. And the housing market.
It would likely cool significantly. The projection mentioned is a potential 5–6% drop in construction and real estate activity by 2026, simply because financing becomes more expensive.
And the big picture risk, the overall national debt.
That's where it gets really worrying. If this selling of U.S. Treasuries becomes sustained, the projections warn of a potential debt servicing crisis. We're talking numbers like an extra $1 trillion in interest payments for the U.S. government by 2026.
$1 trillion in extra interest.
That's the figure cited.
Wow.
And a U.S. debt crisis on that scale isn't just an American problem. Given the dollar's role, it threatens global economic stability.
So wrapping this all together, what's the final takeaway? It feels like the U.S. is maybe facing the consequences of taking the dollar's global status for granted, relying on history rather than constantly reinforcing trust.
That's certainly one interpretation presented in the analysis. This gold movement isn't just accounting. It's the physical evidence of a strategic shift away from the U.S.-centric financial system.
We're seeing the acceleration of a sort of post-dollar world.
It looks that way. And you have to see it alongside the alternative infrastructure that's being actively built right now. Countries aren't just moving gold bars, they're building new pipes for money itself to flow through.
Like what? What are these alternatives?
Well, look at China's CIPS system, the cross-border interbank payment system. It's explicitly designed as an alternative to the Western SWIFT network. It facilitates trade settled directly in yuan or other non-dollar currencies. And they're pushing hard on digital currencies, too, like the Enbridge project. That's a multi-country platform aiming for instant cross-border payments, completely bypassing the traditional correspondent banking system that relies heavily on New York and London.
And Europe isn't just watching this happen, presumably, if they're worried enough to potentially move gold.
Right. They're also exploring ways to achieve greater financial autonomy. There's serious consideration of independent European payment platforms, and the idea of a digital euro fits into this. It could allow Europe to handle more of its own regional trade and settlements internally, reducing reliance on a dollar system that, as we've discussed, they now perceive as potentially risky or weaponizable.
So this gold story, it's actually a symptom of a much bigger geopolitical and financial realignment.
Precisely. That's why you could call it a sort of geopolitical and financial coup, happening quietly but with massive implications. The world is demonstrably moving towards a more multipolar financial system. That long-standing U.S. dominance, built on decades of trust and the convenience of the dollar, is facing serious challenges as these alternatives become more viable and politically attractive.
Okay, so we've covered a lot. We saw China's dramatic return of the dragon with military planes. We looked back at why the NY Fed became the world's vault, the Bretton Woods legacy. We dug into the political fears, the Trump rhetoric, the Russia sanctions precedent that seemed to be driving European anxieties and potential withdrawals. And we explored the potential economic fallout, the pressure on U.S. bonds, rising interest rates, consumer impact, and that staggering $1 trillion debt risk. It really feels like a foundational shift.
It does. We're genuinely watching financial history being made. And it leaves us with a really crucial question to ponder, doesn't it? Even if the U.S. manages to calm immediate fears about political interference, how long before these new alternative systems like CIPS, like Enbridge, maybe a digital euro, become so efficient, so convenient, that using the traditional dollar-based system becomes financially disadvantageous, not just politically risky? Will the world simply bypass the old American financial infrastructure because new independent rails have been built? That's something for you, the listener, to really mull over as the global financial architecture continues to change right before our eyes.